So I really appreciate you all coming and listening to what we have to listen from Daniel. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Daniel to, are you here, Daniel?
It's me.
Okay,
Hello,
hi.
everyone.
Good to see you. Good morning. Would you like to
Good
share the
morning.
screen with me, or are you okay to talk the way you have you there?
Yes, so good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ashton. Thanks for having me today. I hope that you've started a wonderful day, and hopefully I can give you some good information that you can make a good use of in your businesses. So if you allow me, I can share my screen.
Good to see you, and thank you for joining us, Daniel. So briefly, I want to tell you a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do, how you help real estate agents. I know you're in the field of legal and dealing a lot with landlords and tenants, and we had a long conversation before. So
Right.
here is the speaker, and go ahead, it's your time.
So my name is Daniel Yusefian, and I'm a licensed paralegal. And for some reason, I was dragged into landlord and disputes. And I have a lot of experience in this field, and I've encountered many issues during my practice in this last few years. And unfortunately, it's getting harder and harder because of the current market situation. So as we've decided to, put it into kind of a webinar or a session like this, so we can pass on some of our information to the good agents that they're working in the current market. So today's session is about how to sell a unit with a tenant. So I'm sure as a real estate agent, all of you have encountered with properties that they had tenants living there. Sorry?
So just please mute yourself.
Yeah, so so a lot of people, either they're selling their own homes or houses, which is not that hard, but when you're dealing with a property that has tenant, you're dealing with a third person that has interest in that land. Like it's true that the property is owned by a landlord, but there is a third person named tenant that has interest and living in that property, and it's their home, and they have rights under, provincial acts, which can't be undermined, because if we do, we're gonna face with more challenges, more difficulties, and even the landlord may face with several lawsuits. So it's better to be careful when we are dealing with these kind of properties. So I'm gonna start with, just the first thing that we can do. Can you see my screen, Ashton?
Yes.
Yes. So the first thing is we have to deal with the tenants. And we are kind of, as an agent, I believe we are in the middle. As a paralegal, I'm only representing the landlord or the tenant. But as an agent, you kind of need to work with both sides, because the landlord expects you to book showing, sell the house at the highest possible price, and you have to deal with the tenant on the other side. It's something that you have to deal with. Like the first thing that I want to mention, the best option is just to try to terminate the tenancy with an agreement, which is called an 11. So if you can reach an agreement with the tenant, say, listen, I am the agent, the landlord is in need of the property. Don't mention a lot of details, because later on, if we need to try evicting the tenant for any reason, if you give too much information, that may cause the landlord being like untruthful, which is not a good thing. So just come up with a plan, talk to a paralegal, talk to the landlord, talk to the tenant, and come up with a plan first. And then you need to go to the tenant. Hey, listen, we understand that you're a good tenant, you're paying rent on time, we understand this is your home, you know, your kids go to school, they love it here, but the landlord is in need of their property. So is there any way that we can terminate the tenancy with an agreement? You have to be very friendly because they don't like to leave. As I said, it's their home and they don't like to leave that place. But first thing we have to try. If they agree, try to give them more time, you know, instead of 1 month, 2 months, give them 3 months, 4 months. What? It is good if you can get an N11 agreement. N11 is an agreement which is designed by the Landlord and Tenant Board Ontario, and it is the best form to use if you want to try to terminate the lease. You need to put everyone's name, all of the tenants, all of the landlord's name on that form, and you need to have a termination date. All of the parties must sign and put a date when they are signing it. So this is very important to have this form, because if the tenant does not leave by the promised date, you can go to the landlord and tenant board and get an eviction order based on that form. So it is very important to have that form. However, the tenant may say, no, I'm not leaving this property, because they have a right to stay in that property, even if the property is being sold. Selling a property is not a valid reason to evict the tenant, unless the purchaser needs it for her or his own use, or for one of the valid reasons, like I need it for my parent, I need it for my daughter, I need it for my caregiver, which is a different pathway. So, any questions up until here?
Daniel, I have a question here. What about if I'm getting bankrupt? I mean, the interest rate is so high, I cannot really maintain and keep the property. I'm in trouble. So whether I sell it or go bank foreclosure, but I don't want to ruin my credit. So is there any solution for that?
The solution is just to sell the unit with a tenant. You need to sell that property with a tenant, which is our next slide and our next topic. If you have to come to the second level, which is selling the property with the tenant, you have to make sure that you follow the guidelines. You have to tell them, I'm the agent, I'm a licensed professional, I've been hired by the landlord to sell the property. I understand your concerns. I know that you're living there, so we're gonna do it as, you know, convenient and as quiet as possible. So they need to cooperate with you, and you can have your showings. You have to sell the property with tenants. I understand that the house, it may not have a lot of, you know, potential buyers, but at least a lot of houses, they are being sold with a tenant. So the first thing is just you need to serve proper notice of entry to the tenant before each showing. It can't be a one-time thing. Oh, I'm going to sell this property, I'm booking showings. No, it can't be like that. You have to serve them a notice. Try to get their consent to serve the notices with email, because that would be the convenience way for you. Otherwise, you have to put it under their door. You know, there are specific rules, or mail it to them, which is more challenging than just giving them the email. And try to get their confirmation. That's the best way. You need to give them 24 hours notice minimum prior to your entry. So that's very important, because otherwise, if we don't follow the guidelines, the landlord will face with illegal entry lawsuits, and which is not a good thing. So After, giving them the notice, on the notice, you need to specify why you need to enter the unit. Because we need to have showings. You need to give them a window from, it can be from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 p.m., but you need to specify in a specific window during these hours. Like, for example, from 5 to 7, you don't have to give them the exact minutes, but you need to be like, have a narrow window, because you can't just say 12 hours is just good and sufficient. So, and there was a reason for entry and the time of entry and the 24-hour notice. So, and on the other side, when you're selling the unit with a tenant, the buyer may force you to just promise that this home is going to be handed over vacant, which you cannot do that promise. If you have a tenant there, even if they tell you that they're going to leave, until you have the N11 and, or an eviction order, there you don't have any guarantees. Because if you just promise the buyer that you're going to give the position of the house in vacant position, that means that the house is empty. And if the house is not empty, then you're gonna lose the deal. They can just say, oh, I don't want this house, I wanted to move in the house, there is someone living in the house, and I don't want this house anymore. So make sure that in your agreement, you have the tenant is living there, and either they continue to live there, or you can take the next step and serve the proper N12. This is when you have an agreement of purchase and sale. It cannot be before that. After you have the APS, you can serve the proper N12 notice. If the buyer needs the unit for his own use or one of the valid reasons that is stated on the N12. Like, as I said, I need the unit for my son's use, for my daughter, for my parents, or for my caregiver, something like that. And then the tenant has 60 days usually to leave. It is variable, but at the minimum is 60 days. So after, if they don't leave, or meanwhile, you can file the necessary applications, which is an L2 application with the landlord and tenant board, but this will take about minimum 4 to 5 months. And the buyer has to prove that. First, we need to prove that the house is sold. We have an agreement of purchase and sale. And then the buyer needs it for his own use or for one of the valid reasons stated on the N12. Then the board will proceed with the eviction. So any questions up until now? Sorry, is there any questions for this part?
There was one question, it was asked in the chat, said, if the lease is under 2-person and then all of a sudden it's home hacking, means there are 5 people living there. Is N11 helps here, or what should we do?
Occupants and tenants are different things. So you may have 2 tenants on the lease and 5 occupants, like 5 people living there. As long as you have the tenant's name on the N11, it's gonna be sufficient, because you are dealing with tenants, not the people living there. The tenants, they have right under the RTA, the Residential Tenancies Act, not the other occupants. Unless there is like unauthorized occupants, other people living in the unit, and the main tenants, they are not living there anymore. But let's assume that this is not the case, and the tenants are living there, they are sharing the unit with other people, renting a room, they have roommates, even if it's not their kids, it can be a roommate, but the roommate has to leave with the tenant. A roommate is not a tenant. Only who you have on the lease, the person on the lease, is considered a tenant.
Okay, thank you.
And there is another thing that I can add. What happens if, you know, the tenant has changed the locks and he or she is not allowing the showings? Then you have to give them a notice, which is usually an N5 notice, stating that you've changed the locks illegally and we need access. And if they don't give you access to the unit, then you need to apply to the landlord and tenant board, and you need to have the remedies from the board, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to sell the unit. And make sure you don't take pictures unless you have written consent of the tenants. I highly recommend that you don't take any pictures from inside of the house. So let's move on to next chapter. There is another option, which is cash for key. In this option, it can this agreement can come to the picture at any stage. It involves you know, giving the tenant an 11 agreement and other agreements. But the first thing is that we have to negotiate with the tenant to see how much it costs for them to give up their rights and leave the property. Sometimes, for example, it is better to give them 10,000, 15,000, or 20,000 and sell the unit without the tenant, because a unit without the tenant, it has a higher market value than a unit with a tenant, because in the current market, no one is willing to buy a property with a tenant because the rent is less than what they're gonna paying for the current mortgage. So if an investor wants to buy a property with a tenant and they have to keep the tenant, they're not gonna buy that property. So, and if they want to just come and use the property for their own use, again, it's gonna take time to just go through the landlord and tenant board and get an eviction order. So at the end, it's better to you know, negotiate and cut a deal with the tenants. In this option, we just give a monetary compensation and just get a promise from them when they're gonna leave. So if that's the case, again, we're gonna have an N11 signed, because that says when they're gonna leave, who's the tenant, who's the landlord, when they're gonna terminate the tenancy with the signatures. And on the other side, we're gonna have a release agreement, which is a settlement agreement, you know, general release agreement. And in that agreement, we mention in details that the conditions of the settlement, and that, more important, that the tenant cannot sue the landlord in the future. For example, they cannot say, oh, there was illegal entry to the unit, I didn't enjoy the property, or the landlord was harassing me, and these guys, they didn't move into the property. So at any stage before the hearing, we can have this agreement signed with an 11, and both parties, they will benefit from this agreement, in my opinion. So that's it for now, and if you have any questions, I can answer them now. That I hope that you have the whole picture, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer the questions.
Daniel, I have a few questions here asked by agents on the chat. One of them is, you mentioned that we need a written permission for taking pictures.
It's better to have written permission, yes.
Okay. The other, so I think we can manage that one through email, like when we email the tenants, we can indicate there that at certain days we're coming, is it okay to take a picture?
Yes,
Okay, so we can
absolutely.
use email as a proof. So always have a proof of your action.
Yes, because in the act it says that the landlord or the agents or the purchasers, they cannot take pictures from inside the house. So it's better to make sure that the tenant is okay with this thing.
Okay, and if someone is month to month,
Mhm.
are they still under the same rule? Let's say after 2 years, the first year, the contract is finished, they decide to go month to month. Are they still going through the same procedure with N11?
Ashton, actually, this is a good question. A lot of people, they think that after the contract, the term is done, there is no contract actually. But the interesting point that we have two kind of contracts of tenancy. One is a fixed term contract. For example, as an agent, you do these a lot. When you're entering into a tenancy agreement, you do like minimum, usually a 1-year agreement for your clients. This means that no one can terminate that tenancy earlier than a year. That is a fixed term tenancy. Like if I go to a place and I sign a fixed term tenancy, which is prepared by my agent, like for 1 year, I start from today, 1 year later, it is like, let's say end of September 2024, my lease agreement is finished. That is the end of the fixed term. It means that the landlord cannot serve an N12 or any other notices earlier than that specific date. Like for example, N12, it says give 60 days notice to the tenant, but that's not true in this case. The landlord has determined, he doesn't have to wait, but the termination date on the notice, it can't be earlier than my contract date. He has to wait till end of September 2024. So after that, again, after that date, we have two options, either to renew it on a fixed term basis. For example, I'm going to say again, another year, end of 2025. However, there's another option which I can just say, listen, I want to do month-to-month basis. Then on month-to-month basis, I'm still a tenant. I still have the contract. I still have rights as a tenant. However, if we want to terminate by an 11 agreement, as I said, this is an agreement. The termination date can be any date. So for example, you're just entering into an agreement with a tenant, and 6 months later, your client calls you, hey, listen, Ashton, I need my property to be sold. Then either you have to just sell the property with the tenant and tell the landlord you have to wait 6 months, or you have to again prepare an N11 agreement and have an N11 agreement signed. That termination date on an 11 agreement can be any date because both parties are happy, both parties are satisfied, and they're agreeing on a certain date.
Okay, so if you give an 11 after that 1-year contract, in fact, you're not breaching the contract terms anymore. So you should be okay,
No.
more open. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the other question, along the way of taking pictures permission, someone asked if we can use the old pictures of that property. I don't think that has anything to do with the tenant. You're not
That
taking.
has nothing to do with the tenant because the
Okay.
tenant did not have the position of the unit at that time, and there is nothing like there's no deprivation of privacy, you know, that you say the tenant will suffer anything. So I'd say no, there's no problem. So it's always better to have pictures like taken before you let the tenant in, so you can use it later
Okay,
for
another
your
question
marketing purposes.
was asking the tenant to leave because we're doing renovation. based on my experience, I would say be careful, because that's not an excuse to kick them out and rent it after. So elaborate on that, Daniel.
That's absolutely right. So the thing is, for renovation purposes, actually, you need to offer the tenant to come back to the unit with the same price. So unless the renovations are really necessary, like the house is just tearing off, the building is falling off, everything is just going out of the way. So you don't need to do renovations, because that's an extra cost which you will not benefit. So it is, and you cannot kick them out because just you need to renovate. That has another procedure, and we can just have another presentation based on eviction on renovation basis.
Okay, so but for the excuse of putting a kitchen backsplash, you cannot ask the tenant leave.
Absolutely not.
It has to have
Absolutely.
some hazardous effect into health of the
Yes,
tenant, and then
absolutely.
you can ask them to leave. And they can come back after any
They can
detail,
come back after the renovations are done,
even if it takes a year.
even if it takes a year. If they're willing to come back, they should come back.
Okay, so
And then you need to just go to the landlord and tenant board and satisfy that these renovations are necessary and you have the permit, and what's the purpose of these renovations.
okay, and if a tenant for any reason refuse to leave, what is the procedure? Let's say, first of all, you cannot increase the rent just based on what you like. Let's say from today you pay $500 more. Of course, you cannot do that
No,
if your
you can't.
building is older than 2018, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And it's just like end of 2018. So I'd say the buildings, they were built after 2019. So, and it's not all the buildings, there are like 4 to 5 lines to the act, so that you need to make sure that the new building it complies with all of the specifics in the act. So no, you cannot increase the rent. If you want to increase the rent, you have to go by the guidelines, and you need to give the tenants a notice, which is N1 if I'm not mistaken. We have many notices prepared by the landlord and tenant board, and you need to give them 3 months notice prior to increasing the rent.
Can you sign an N11 at the day that they are occupying the property with lease agreement?
Absolutely not. One of the like the things that is mentioned on the N11 agreement, it clearly states that you cannot just have the tenant sign this agreement when you're entering into a contract with the tenant. So that is not an option.
Okay. One of the question here said with the N12, there's a clause to put the offer that states that the new buyers hold sellers harmless if tenant does not move out. Does that protect the seller? Meaning
So
if I take over as a new buyer,
Mhm.
I'm not going to harm or go crazy on the rent with the tenant that is already sitting there. Is that correct?
Sorry, I didn't understand the
So
question.
if as a new buyer, I take
Mhm.
over the place using
Right.
N11, it means that my new ownership of the house as a new landlord, I cannot harm the tenants in different ways to kick them out.
No, you
Fine.
cannot. Like, if the tenant remains in the unit, and if you take over the property as a new purchaser, you have the same contract with the tenant, same price, same rights, same obligations. You cannot just say, "Oh, I'm the new landlord. I don't like you as a tenant. I'm gonna kick you out." That is not an option. So that's why the buyers, they will insist to just have the vacant position of the unit.
Okay, and the question
Because they
is,
want to just have a new tenant with a new rate, right?
okay, is there any resources for the landlord that facing a tenant that refused to leave because they pending eviction? Is there any further steps we should take?
You know, the best thing, I would encourage all of the landlords to become familiar with their rights and specifically with the tenants' rights. And that can be done by, doing like some web search on the Landlords and Tenant Board website, by reading the Residential Tenancies Act, and there's like other resources like landlord self-help that they can become with their that they can become familiar with their rights. So, and another way is just to get legal consultation from, lawyers or paralegals who are practicing in this field. So, but before, just buying a property for your client, it's always good to prepare them for what they may face in the future. Because I've heard from a lot of people that, oh, my agent told me buy this property and the tenant will pay your mortgage, and after 25 years you're gonna have a property in your name fully paid off. That is the best case scenario, but as all of us know, there is nothing like in life that is 100%, good. We have to be realistic. We have to tell them, okay, you have obligation to, fix the ceiling. If there is, a leak, you have to go and change the toilet. You have to be prepared financially just in case if your tenant doesn't pay you for 6 months, at least you have, you can keep your property and you don't have to hand it over to the bank. So it's the most important thing. The most important part of becoming a landlord is not just signing the contract and buying the property, is being prepared for what is coming in the future.
All right. It seems the law in Ontario is very tight when it comes to protecting the landlord. Is there anything that is opening up or changing?
I don't believe so. The only thing that it has changed is one of the rent control, like that you've mentioned, like some buildings that they're exempt from the rent control rules, which is, I'm not sure whether they're gonna change that and just make all the buildings like covered by rent control rules, or they may say, okay, let's have, a fair market or whatever it is, let's go based on the market price. So I don't know what's happening in future, but for now, the tenants, they have a right to stay in the property. As I mentioned, it's their home and they have security of tenure, which means they shouldn't be kicked out of the property for any unreasonable thing. So I'd say that the landlords, they have to be careful with what they're doing.
Yeah. I've heard the story. This is one of the questions. If after they sign in 11, the day that is it is the closing, the tenant surprise you by not leaving. So I think you have to go through that eviction, regardless it takes 3 months or 6 months or 1 year.
Yes, but at least, you have an agreement that you can show to the board, listen, we had an agreement, it was voluntarily, they just signed it, and now they're not leaving. And as long as you just disclose that to the buyer, you should not have a problem.
Okay, few things I bring it up here as experience. First of all, never ever go head to head with a tenant. Always be nice and understanding,
Right.
and try your way out into that closing deal. Secondly, never talk on behalf of the landlord. Well, the landlord told me this and this, so don't just keep it quiet. Just listen as much as you could, and just come with most effective way of communicating with the tenant. Sometimes they are
That's
looking
absolutely
for excuses or reason. Oh, your tenants, your agents say that, so I hold you accountable for what your representative told you. So this is what you have to be careful based on my experience. Is that right, Daniel?
That is absolutely right. You have to be always, positive, and you have to be always open for, negotiations with tenant, and you have to always listen to their concerns, even if that concern is not, valid concern. But as I said, it's their home and no one really wants to leave. Like, imagine if you're a tenant and if you're living in a property and you've spent some tenants, they've spent few years, like they had kids over there, the kids are grown up, so they're attached to that property. So it's not gonna be, some people, they're easygoing. As soon as you tell them leave, they're gonna
Yes, sir.
say, okay, I don't care, I leave. But
Yeah.
some people, they take it serious. So you have to be careful.
Well, I appreciate that. I agree with some of the comment here went on chat that this is not fair. It's tougher for investors. Listen, I'm investing for the last 20 years. I went through all of them. What was the most effective way for me to deal with my tenants was two things. Along the way of tenancy, whether it takes 1 year or 5 years, I'm always nice to them. I try to walk with them and I always tell them you're part of family. Kind of, let's work together. That helped 100% of the time. And never ever go head to head with your, even if they want, okay, can we start selling the house in a week from now because we have party? That's no problem. We can arrange that. Just go along the way, show them that you're human, they are human, you're nice people. Reminds me door knocking. Sometimes some other agents ask me to help them with door knocking. I said, okay, when you face someone that's angry, open the door. You don't go head to head. He said, sir, I'm just wanted to present myself because everybody in this neighborhood are nice. What does it mean? It means you have to be nice too.
Yeah, it's really nice too.
That always work when comes to other people. So let me take this screen back here.
That is right. And Ashton, one more thing. This is my business information. So I do a lot of online hearings, online consultation. So if any of you have questions, my phone number is 647-544-3247. And you can just visit my website at ylslegalservices.ca.
I really appreciate you coming here. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thanks for having me.
For sharing your time with us. By the way, for next week, we are going to have continuation of our Realtor and AI and how AI is helping Realtor. That's going to be part 4. What we did so far was part 1, 2, and 3. And on part 3, we presented the lead magnet, which this is one sample of lead magnet. This is a posting I put to Facebook. And by the way, to generate all these leads, it is free. So why don't you take advantage of it? So what's happened through that lead magnet on Facebook, for instance, I created, back was in April, I created 1,635 leads. So these are sellers. So this is free, guys. Use it. It's all given to you. And if you go on my YouTube channel, there are a ton of resources. These are interviews I had with all the top-notch investors across Canada. We had a webinar with them, and they are sharing a lot of experiences and hacks and tips that they could to help you be successful in investment. You can send that one to your client, or you can use it, and it's a great source of information for you. Also, some of you are not part of my Facebook channel. This is a Facebook for all the real estate agents, successful real estate agents regarding health, family, and business. That's what it matters. So you can go there, and every few days, I put good resources of information for you to be successful in your real estate. And I think we answered all the questions. If you have any question, you can book a call with me, and I can help you to be as successful as you could. And with anything in your real estate, if you need help with video production, YouTube, just name it. I'm here to help you, all of you. And thank you very
And
much, Daniel.
Ashton, sorry, just one more thing to add. Whatever I said, these are not legal advice. So if every case has its specific, it's unique, has its specific, matters that we have to deal with, and it's better to always have someone, a professional with an experience, to help you with selling a property with a tenant and with, dealing with the tenants.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming, and
Problem.
thank you. Hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.